Welcome everyone to this session of the in an online colloquium. Today we have, I think maybe I'll put this in the wrong order. Today we have Andreas Gegenfurtner, who is now at the University of Augsburg, and he's going to give us a talk today called Towards a Cognitive Theory of Visual Expertise, which we're very excited about, and we're really happy that Andreas could join us. Continuing in the line of former Erno's former PhD students who have become professors, and so now we're getting towards my generation. So it's nice to see. Yeah. So I'll go back just to kind of go through again the schedule. First, yeah, this is the intro. And then Andreas will give us about a 45-minute talk, give or take a few minutes, I'm sure. And then Erno and Andreas will have a discussion together on whatever topic they find the most interesting. And then Andreas has prepared a short breakout room question that we'll be able to spend some time and discuss together after Erno and Andreas have their chat. And then we'll wrap up with a couple minutes. We should probably change this at some point from 5 to 10 minutes to maybe 2 minutes or so. So yeah, but then, yeah, this should lead us through about an hour and a half. So that's at least the schedule for the day. Just a reminder that this is starting to get, actually, I had to readjust this for today because now our list of ELOC talks that are now available on YouTube is getting quite long, and so just a reminder to go back and check out the previous recordings of these talks, which are available. I'm not sure if Tommy's is yet up, but at least I think through Mina and Lasse, they're all available, so don't forget to check those out. Yeah, but as we can see, now we're moving on to Andreas. And just a few words about Andreas that came to mind when I was thinking about him and thinking about, yeah, kind of his career up to this point. The first one that comes to mind, obviously, is this idea of expertise. But I think that also, you know, when I was thinking about Andreas, I was also thinking about Erno and thinking about sort of the things that I think we as Erno students have been, you know, things that we've taken away that are not just sort of our research topic, but I think the idea that you know, we as researchers also should have, you know, broad interest and broad expertise, that I think Andreas's research shows that that it's not just one topic, but many different areas, and especially his ability to integrate these areas in his research and look at things from fresh perspectives. I think it's particularly impressive. I think also his work speaks to this long-sighted kind of it's an awkward word, but I couldn't think of any better way to say it. But I think that one thing that I see in Andreas's work is a kind of not taking a short view on the impact of his research, but actually really trying to have a long-term impact. And I'll come back to that in the C especially. But I think that another thing that kind of strikes me whenever we discuss with Andreas about different topics is his overwhelming optimism. And I think that this is also, you know, a trait that I see both in Erno and in Andreas, that they're both able to see the positive in any idea. But yeah, this ability to see the positive in any idea, I think, is something that really strikes me in both what Andreas and Erno have in their qualities, and yeah. And then finally, this critical impact that I think that one thing I really appreciate about Andreas's work is that you know, especially his work sort of with meta-science and looking at using meta-analyses to advance our research, shows that his productivity, which is you know, very impressive on its own, isn't productivity just for the sake of it, but actually really is trying to push the field forward in a way that is both effective and responsible. And so, yeah, those are the words that I thought of when I thought of Andreas. So, and with that, then I think we can turn the floor over to you, Andreas. And so, yeah, welcome, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Jake. These have been very, very kind words, and I feel very flattered. Let me quickly share my slides for this talk today. I would assume you can see the slides now. So thank you very much once again also for having me, for inviting me to contribute to this series in honor of Erno's oeuvre and his lifetime achievements on learning and instruction. Of course, if you get an invitation like this to speak about the connections we have had for a very long time, then what comes to mind, of course, is the first meeting Erno and me had. I think we first met in Regensburg in 2006, where I have been visiting Hans Gruber. We met in the PT building in the room PT 212, where Hans introduced me to you, arguing or saying that I will visit you as an Erasmus exchange student next year, 2007, in Turku, which was our first meeting, and I was already then impressed by what seemed to me your wisdom, your obvious insights and expertise in the field. This is now a picture that you see here from my defense, my doctoral dissertation defense in Turku. You also see Roger here. Welcome, Roger. Nice that you are here with us this afternoon, together with Maria Vauras, who have been also very influential in shaping the early development of my career in Turku. And of course, there's Anastasia Evclides, who has been a very strict opponent, having very, very critical, difficult questions for me to answer during the defense. After the defense, we went on to celebrate, of course, as we do in Finland, which is a picture here that you can see also showcasing another host of the ELOC series of Minna, together with Kuhn and Emmanuel Opoku-Aqua, who will be the next ELOC presenter following after me. Now, in the word tradition of ELOC, having those 4 letters that Jake, you kindly used to describe myself, I thought about how could I describe Erno and the impact you had, Erno, on my development. And of course, when we look back in history, then we see that you have mentored or supervised my diploma thesis in Regensburg, my PhD thesis in Turku, and my habilitation thesis in Regensburg. So all 3 of those theses have been supervised by you. So I consider myself your student, and you are my academic father, my doctor father. So I'm very honored to be part of the family. Of course, also Roger had a very huge impact in the PhD thesis, and afterwards also in the work that is contributing to the habilitation. So both of you, together with Hans, I would say, are the 3 most influential figures shaping my early interests and concepts about what it is that we do in research on learning and instruction. The second word, the L, for me, I know you're also a role model, particularly when it comes to acting as an academic, which has been highly associated with the early community. You have been one of the first for the first presentations we submitted to conferences. You have allowed me and financed travels to SIG meetings, and were very influential in enabling me to participate in early. So this peripheral legitimate participation, if you wish, as becoming part of the early expertise community has been largely influenced by you, and kind of you showed me how it's done in early, and Roger, of course, you too. As a mentor, you've also been very influential. You created, I think, an environment, an atmosphere where we could collaborate, where we could share ideas in a very positive spirit. It has been very productive as well, and trustful. So it was a very caring environment, being part of a family. I remember many discussions we had in that little round table in your room, in Elocarium, in your office, where we discussed many ideas. And this is, a picture of an award we received for a very first presentation I gave at the Jure conference, which came, by the way, in that silver framing. That it still is in that silver frame, hanging next to me on the wall at my home office. Also, I think what has been a product or a consequence of the many discussions we had together with Roger in the Learn Met Image project was that it changed many of my conceptions I had about what learning is, what expertise is, what it means to see, to educate. So this has been significant for my development. So thank you very much for that. And by coincidence, we also published a paper on conceptual change in the development of visual expertise, which is the topic of today's talk. So thank you for being with me, supporting me, supervising me, mentoring me over the past, well, not 20 years, but almost 20 years now. So it's a shockingly long time. Okay, so today's talk will focus about visual expertise. And I will shamelessly make use of a chapter, book chapter, co-authored also by you, Erno, and by Roger, Hans Gruber, Tina Seidel, many others. If you're interested in that paper, those of you who listen to that talk, please send me an email. I can send you the PDF, or you can also download it on ResearchGate. This focus on visual expertise is something that is also very prevalent in my work now in Augsburg. Also my PhD students are working on expertise and visual expertise, and even some of my master students who are now here with us today as well. So welcome to those of you who know me from Augsburg University. We can define visual expertise as a reproducibly superior performance of professionals in processing domain-specific visual information. Processing visual information is important, particularly in visual-intensive domains, and you see a few examples of those domains on the slide. We see the work of teachers in classrooms, very visual-intensive, which is performed also from Mikey Pota in Helsinki and in Turku. We see the work of artists when they sculpt different objects, when they produce art. Of course, in the field of medicine, when professionals make visual diagnostic decisions. And you also see a player from a favorite football club, FC Bayern München, who will play tonight quarterfinals in the UEFA Champions League against FC Villarreal from Spain. Hopefully they win. Let's see. Also goalkeepers, of course, have a highly vision-intensive job to do, anticipating the movement of different balls and trying to catch it. So all in those domains, seeing is central. And seeing, of course, can be reduced or conceptualized as visual information that passes through the eye and travels as electrochemical signals through optic nerve to the central cortex. But this is, of course, just part of the story. And what creates and makes visual expertise requires a broader analysis. And this brings us to, I think, the work of Charles Goodwin, who introduced the notion of professional vision to account for the situated and discursive nature of seeing as a professional activity in various domains of expertise. Goodwin's work built on ethnographic, in-depth observations of discursive practices in the wild. Then he defined or conceptualized seeing, not just as a purely mental process, as you can read here, but instead as something that is accomplished through the competent deployment of a set of discursive practices that are contingent on what professionals do in the different domains of expertise, such as teachers in classrooms, goalkeepers in football, or radiologists when they diagnose different kinds of anatomical representations of the human body. So in addition to analyzing the emergence of visual expertise in social practices in a Goodwinian tradition, other researchers examined other indicators of such expertise, such as verbal reports or eye movements or neurophysiologic activity, to understand the processes involved when experts skillfully perceive, interpret, and act on the basis of visual information. Now, in this talk, I would like to focus on some of these methods of inquiry, on the empirical evidence they produce of expert performance in the professions where members develop those visual skills. Ultimately, I would like to present a novel theory that we call the cognitive theory of visual expertise, which is, of course, a product from many discussions we had together with Erno and Roger in Turku and elsewhere. So my talk, I would like to structure the talk in 3 sections. First, I'd like to talk about methods of inquiry first, producing some evidence on expert-novice differences in the professions, then present the theory, and ultimately end with a few reflections on its educational implications and also implications for methods. And that's something I also learned from you, Erno, that we can integrate different perspectives when we focus on certain phenomena, such as professional vision, that we just, we can integrate evidence from different fields, different theories, and use a plethora of different methods to get access to the phenomena we scrutinize. And I remember I asked you once why you did that. Why did you use so many theories and methods and not just focus on one? And you said, well, because you were interested in so much and it bores you, you said, to do always the same, which is, I think, is something that transferred, if you will, from your work to my work now, that I also try to make sense of phenomena using different multiple perspectives. So thank you for that impact. Okay, let's continue with the first section of this talk, the methods of inquiry in the science of visual expertise. Now, when studying experts and the exceptional performance in comprehending domain-specific visual information, we can use different methods, as you see here on the slide. And let me start with the first of those methods, qualitative observations, that also has been used most prominently, I think, with the work of Charles Goodwin. Qualitative observations in ethnographies and similar methods of participant observation explore how professional work unfolds in socio-material activity systems. The focus is on visual practices experts use to interact with visual information in their work environment, as these are available to an observer. And here you see an example from a study we did in Turku, where an expert in radiology tried to explain to us novices how we can diagnose X-rays of the lung, chest X-rays, which was new to us. We had no idea of how to diagnose X-rays. And by videographing that interaction, we were able to identify visual practices the expert used to make sense of what is visible on those X-ray pictures. Visual practices that has been used by that expert at the Turku hospital are constituents of meaning making that are considered relevant for the discourse in a particular community of professionals. And these visual practices allow experts to efficiently transform visual information into linguistic form, share it with co-workers, or produce new visual artifacts. Examples include creating a map in archaeological field excavations, what Goodwin did, discussing video recordings of classroom events with teacher colleagues, which relates to the work of Miriam Sharon in the US, or highlighting, as in our case here, anatomical structures and zooming of radiological pictures. Now, if you understand seeing in this Goodwinian tradition as a socially situated activity accomplished through the deployment of a range of historical and mature discursive practices that are negotiated and shared among members of a domain, then those observations are useful when attempting to gain access to some of the visual practices experts use when acting on visual information in their professional work. I hope this makes sense. This is so the first method I think we can use when studying professional vision. A second method are interviews. Interviews explore how experts reason and what they think when working with domain-specific information in a visual task. Interviews include, for example, concurrent thinking aloud protocols during an activity or retrospective verbal reports after an activity. The focus here is on expert memory and thinking, not so much on the practices, but rather on processes of thinking and memorizing. Now, what evidence suggests here is that there's substantial adaptations to typical task constraints in a profession, and thus lead to changes in cognitive skills. These changes are associated, for example, with the fusion of working memory and long-term memory into long-term working memory, which has been described by Carl N. Erickson in Florida, which drastically increases working memory capacity, processing speed, and memory performance. Further changes are also associated with the amount and organization of declarative and procedural knowledge in expert memory, which explains superior knowledge-based reasoning processes as expertise develops in teachers, in physicians, in many other professions as well. Another significant element of such developmental processes is the experts, when compared to domain novices, develop metacognitive strategies to monitor, control, and evaluate visual information. I'm particularly thankful to you, Roger, for pointing out that evaluative aspects of visual expert processing. That's the second method. The third method would then be eye tracking, which we also use nowadays heavily in Augsburg. Eye tracking explores where, how often, and in which order experts attend to visual information in work tasks. Typical metrics used in expertise research include the number of fixations, fixation duration, saccade amplitude, scan path patterns, and much more. You see two examples here on the slides, one from medicine, from emergency medicine, of one of my doctoral students in Canada, Adam Zalewski. And on the right, an example from a math classroom where we can segment the visual field into different areas of interest and then count how often experts or novice teachers would focus or fixate on those different areas of interest. Now, expertise research suggests that the eye movements and the allocation of attentional resources change with developing expertise. For example, experts compared to domain novices tend to have more fixations of longer duration task relevant information and fewer fixations of shorter duration task irrelevant areas, indicating the ability to keep a quiet eye on what is relevant and to perceptually pay less attention to what is less important at the moment, even if those information is visually salient. Experts also tend to have long saccades, indicating the ability to select visual information parafoveally and holistic, and to select not only single images, and that's important, but also aggregated image chunks. In comparison to domain novices, experts tend to engage in recurring scans to readjust their processing if needed, which is what teachers do every day, what we do when we teach in front of classrooms. We constantly scan our students to make sure they understand what we try to convey. what I do here too a bit when I scan the little video snapshots of your faces in Zoom. Evidence from eye tracking research in a number of professions, including education, sports, medicine, software modeling, and the arts, suggests that the visual processing of domain experts changes from a saliency-driven bottom-up approach to a knowledge-driven top-down approach, which is associated with the development of knowledge-based noticing, which is visible or accessible for us using eye tracking. That's the third method. And the last method I would like to quickly talk about is neuroimaging. The first contact, by the way, I had with neuroimaging was through Minna. She allowed me to follow her into the lab using EEG electrodes on my scalp, which was quite messy. And that was the first contact I had at the time with neuroimaging methods. So thank you, Minna, for messing up my hair. Neuroimaging explores changes in neural activity as expertise develops. And so its methods include electroencephalography and functional magnetic resonance imaging. Expertise research suggests that neural activity changes with developing visual expertise. For example, fMRI studies indicate that the ability of experts to process domain-specific visual information holistically seems to be associated with activation in the right fusiform face area, what you can see on the picture on the right side, and also with an enhanced N170 component for domain-specific objects, which you can see on the left side of the slide. Those evidence indicates that experts process information in the visual register very rapidly in less than 170 milliseconds after stimulus onset, and which is much faster than novices would do. So expertise seems to be associated with a very rapid processing of visual information within a particular domain of expertise. Well, taken together, those observations, interviews, eye tracking, and neuroimaging offer rich data we can use to study experts and novices in their domains when they process visual information. And we distilled, we aggregated, we synthesized this evidence from various studies and came up with a new theory. And this theory is now the second part of my presentation that I would like to present to you. It is rather novel, I have to admit, but I thought it's a very good way to also honor the work of you, Anna, because it is an integration of different theories, different methods, and different perspectives we can have on professional vision. You can see it here, it's a schematic representation of the theory, having lots of different hypotheses and processes and boxes and components. Let me go through those step by step and explain them to you in more detail on the following slide. Now, when developing this theory, we have been guided by 4 criteria. The first criteria was testability. The theory should have been offering predictions that can be tested in expertise research. So it should be it should be possible to test the predictions we make with empirical methods. And the second criteria was theoretical plausibility. So the theory should be consistent with scientific principles of visual perception and expert performance. The third criteria was empirical plausibility. So ideally, the theory should be in line, consistent with empirical research, evidence on professional vision and expertise, not contradicting them. And the last criteria was educational usability, indicating that theory should have usefulness and utility for helping to develop, support, and scaffold the development of visual expertise of domain novices, such as pre-service teachers or medical students in higher education. Now, the cognitive theory of visual expertise uses as a starting point Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning that you see here. I think many of us are very familiar with the theory, which models the information processing of domain novices. And the cognitive theory of visual expertise is now developed to model the information processing of domain experts in contrast. And we have three assumptions that guided the development. We have 2 memory stores included in the theory and 8 processes that are central for the theory. And let me talk about those in the coming slides in greater detail. So first, about the 3 assumptions. The first assumption is what we call the expanded capacity assumption, meaning that expertise extends the capacities for information processing owing to the acquisition of retrieval structures. And those structures allow advanced learners to rapidly encode information in long-term memory and efficiently access it for later task operations. Now, when experts perceive domain-specific visual information, such as a classroom situation or a chessboard, then experts are able to hold large amounts of information processed in long-term working memory at a time. Developing visual expertise in a domain is assumed to overcome the constraints on processing capacity, which are documented for novice learners. The second assumption is the knowledge-based processing assumption, meaning that expertise changes the processing of information in the visual field from a bottom-up, stimulus-driven processing to a more top-down, knowledge-driven processing. Now, when experts perceive domain-specific visual information, then extensive and highly organized declarative knowledge stored in long-term working memory regulates the content, the amount, and the interpretation of their perception. The conception of knowledge-based noticing and knowledge-based reasoning has a long history in psychology. Examples are the information reduction hypothesis, the heuristic processing account, or recently developed from Els Boshuizen and Hans Gruber, the knowledge restructuring through case processing theory. And then the third assumption of the theory is the practice-based interaction assumption, which comes, of course, heavily from Goodwin's work, meaning that experts interact with the environment actively when processing information of a visual scene. They're not just passive recipients, but are very active and interact with the environment, shape the environment, and much more. Expertise is associated with learning a set of distinctive visual practices members of a profession use to modify, share, and produce domain-specific visual information. Experts also evaluate. The evaluative and responsive element is central for the development of metacognitive activities of experts, which is a cornerstone of visual expertise as well. Rather than passively processing what is presented to them in social isolation, experts actively transform the social material environment and interact with epistemic artifacts, and often with other people, to render visible what is relevant for a specific task. I think that's an important message we hope to convey in our theory, which also has a long history in psychology, for example, in the work of Gibson, Goodwin, and many others. So I hope that's clear enough about the three assumptions. Let me continue with the two memory stores that are most central in our cognitive theory of visual expertise. The first memory store relates to the visual register, which is indicated here in orange. Visual information from the environment enters the visual register through the eyes. That's the assumption. Now, when visual information enters the register, information is held as exact visual images for a very brief moment in visual sensory memory. Information enters the register through either foveal or parafoveal processing. Now, foveal processing occurs when we move our eyes so that the light from visual information falls directly on the fovea. That's what novices do too. We all do. Now, experts are able to not just process information foveally, but also parafoveally. That is when information is located in an area between 2 degrees to 6 degrees of the visual field, so not on the fovea, but slightly next to it on the parafovea, which is a region of the retina circumscribing the fovea. Experts notice domain-specific information through both channels, through fovea and parafoveal vision, and the ability to process information parafoveally is knowledge-based and a hallmark of expertise. We assume that expertise extends the visual field owing to foveal and parafoveal processing of information entering the visual register, allowing experts to glimpse at domain-specific information rapidly and holistically, even if information is very distant on the periphery of the visual field. That's the first memory store. The second one is long-term working memory, which is based on the work of Anders Ericsson, which you can see here now highlighted in orange. Selected visual information is aggregated in image chunks, organized in a mental model, and integrated with stored declarative knowledge in long-term working memory. When experts select domain-specific visual information, then experts have acquired memory skills to rapidly encode the selected information in long-term memory, where the encoded information is attached to the retrieval cues I mentioned earlier. Those retrieval cues are kept in working memory, allowing experts to rapidly retrieve large amounts of previously encoded information from long-term memory, in contrast to novices with limited prior experience, for whom encoding and decoding typically are very slow processes. Indicated on the slide here, this knowledge is represented as procedural knowledge, declarative knowledge, and metacognitive knowledge. So declarative knowledge, for example, can be encapsulations of semantic and episodic knowledge, of experiences, of content knowledge, stored and structured in expert memory. Procedural knowledge includes also knowing how to skillfully interact with the environment through practices that I mentioned earlier, which can be gesturing, interacting with technology, creating semiotic objects, and much more. And finally, metacognitive knowledge includes heuristics, control strategies, learning strategies that would help experts to evaluate, to monitor task processes, also including help-seeking processes and motivation regulation and much more, coping with stress. All this is stored, we assume, in metacognitive knowledge in long-term working memory. Okay, so these are the two memory stores that we conceptualized in our theory. And now you see many italicized terms that I would like to talk now. These are the processes that we conceptualized in the theory. 8 processes altogether. Let me start first with the top 4 processes, which relate to the visual in noticing, and then the later 4 processes would be more associated with the reasoning, the interpreting of information. Okay, so when experts look at visual information, such as students in a classroom or anatomical structures on an X-ray scan, then they allocate attention in the visual register very rapidly, often faster than 170 milliseconds, toward the task-relevant visual information in the environment. This is the selecting of information. Experts also know what to ignore. So they perceptually ignore what is less important in a given situation, directing attention away from momentary task irrelevant visual information. So both is important and has been documented heavily in expertise research. And the decision on what is relevant or irrelevant, these are based on experts' amassed knowledge stored in long-term working memory. So those top-down influences help experts decide what's relevant and what's irrelevant, what to select and what to ignore, and what to process further in the meaning-making processes. Now, this amassed knowledge also helps experts, that's the bottom process here, to rapidly select or ignore visual information on the periphery of the visual field and to perceive information holistically. Now, that's the extension of the visual field that we also conceptualize based on expertise research. These are the first four processes. Now, the later four processes, the first one would be the organization. Now, when experts look at visual information, then these visual fields typically very complex. They include a lot of different units of analysis. They have, for example, many students in a classroom, or many different anatomical regions in an X-ray scan, or very many aircrafts represented or symbolized on a radar screen of an air traffic controller. Now, what experts do is they build connection among selected image chunks, not just single pieces, but chunks, to create a coherent mental model in long-term working memory. This mental model is further enriched with amassed knowledge stored in long-term working memory, so it's integrated. When processing information in their work, professionals use, and that's now, I think, what we learn from Goodwin, a set of visual practices. And these practices are often socially organized and materially mediated, which has been also, I think, explored and discussed in depth in Roge's presentation in that ELOC series, I think 2 years ago already, 2020. So these procedural knowledge in long-term working memory helps experts to actively transform the visual field. Finally, experts use their metacognitive knowledge stored in long-term working memory to control and regulate the processes I just mentioned, the integration, the organization, the visual practices, the selection, and many more. All these contribute to the reproducibly superior performance of experts when processing domain-specific visual information. An important element in understanding expertise is that it does not merely concern perception and the interpretation of visual stimuli, but also the evaluation of them. In order to act, professionals do not just perceive and interpret, but they decide on how to proceed on the basis of the information they react to. Thus, expertise involves an evaluative element that informs action. And these are now the 8 processes that we have represented graphically and semantically in our cognitive theory of visual expertise. So let me now, in the third section of my talk a bit more about the implications of the theory for education and for methods. So first, in terms of the theoretical and empirical plausibility, the components of the theory, it's 3 assumptions, the 2 memory stores, and the 8 processes stand on the shoulders of robust evidence distilled from past expertise research and theories, and particularly from data collected with observations, interviews, eye tracking, and neuroimaging that I described at the beginning of my talk. And this all indicates the theoretical and the empirical plausibility of the theory. Clearly, the theory focuses on the visual sensory modality only. So it's about professional vision and what people see. Of course, expertise can also happen in other domains, for example, in music, playing an organ, for example, or in sports, when we run marathons, for example. And then seeing is not the most central component, but hearing is more important, or the movement of body, of body parts. And these here are two pictures representing auditory expertise and motor expertise from another mentor of mine, Hans Kluber in Regensburg, and who is not just a brilliant scientist, but also excels in running, in music, in chess, and many more areas. So it's a bit frightening how skilled he is in various domains, not just in research. How can we use the theory to promote the development of expertise? An answer to this question would include an awareness of how important knowledge is for visual expertise and professional vision, which has been already noted by Goodwin. And the picture you see at the bottom of the slide is from the seminal paper from Goodwin in 1994, taken from his video recordings of archaeological field excavations, where an expert archaeologist communicated, interacted with a novice archaeologist in making meaning of soil and dirt and what can be found there. Insofar as visual practices are lodged within specific professional communities, they can be learned. For example, through apprenticeship relations or through entering communities of practice. Another avenue for expanding knowledge is through deliberate practice, the notion from Anders Ericsson. So if you assume that expert processes of selecting or ignoring, out of knowledge-based noticing, or of organizing image chunks, or even monitoring, can be modeled to novice learners, then the modeling through examples, prompts, and learning environments seem promising tools for training and for deliberate practice activities. Which has been my discussion of the educational applications. So let's focus on methods. Concerning the testability of the theory, we recommend developing a programmatic research agenda that uses a plethora of different methods of inquiry. And I think the work at the OFRE of Erno is a good example of doing that, of being programmatic, of using different methods, of integrating perspectives to have a broader, more comprehensive access to certain phenomena we are interested in. In terms of professional vision, we particularly recommend the use of mixed method designs, integrating different units of analysis. Not just one unit, but ideally combine them, integrate them, which is not an easy task, of course. We can discuss how to do that best, perhaps later on in our discussions. Now, integrating different perspectives, quantitative or qualitative methods, cognitive accounts or social cultural accounts would be, we think, vital for developing the field and overcoming certain reductionist tendencies that have been proposed by you, Erno, as a reductionism upwards or downwards, which we typically find them in mono-method approaches, and that's why we recommend mixing them, if we can. And that's, of course, also a matter of debate, if we should, and how to do the best. but that's beyond this task today. Mixing methods and using different perspectives on seeing would be associated with being aware that vision is not just a mental process. It is, of course, a mental process, but not just only a mental process. It also includes, if we take seriously the work of Charles Goodwin, the competent deployment of discursive practices for meaning making in different professions, including education, medicine, the arts, sports, and many more. So that's almost the end of my talk. Before I close my talk, I would like to invite you, if you are in San Diego in 2 weeks at the ARA conference, and you have not enough now from talking about vision and seeing, then please attend our symposium. It's the early invited symposium at the ARA conference, which I co-organized together with Tina Seidel from Munich. And there's also a talk from Turku researchers, from Maiki Pota, Tuire Parnen, and Erno Lehtinen. So thank you very much for listening to the presentation of our theory. Thank you very much also, again, Erno and Roger, both for being so brilliant mentors, academic fathers, and conceptual changes. It's been an honor being part of the family, being invited to the ELOC series. So thank you very much. Tak, and kiitos paljon for your guidance and supervision. Thank you very much. Oh, and one more thing for discussion for the breakout rooms, but we can do that later.
Yeah.
The question, how can we support the development of expertise? But I think that's something we will discuss in a minute. Great, thank you.
So, thank you very much, Andreas. First, about these very kind words about our relationship. I have also enjoyed very much this collaboration, and I'm impressed of your later career, what you have made. Of course, I had the opportunity to follow that within this habilitation process. But nevertheless, congratulations for and also for the Lehrstuhl in Augsburg. It's nice that you have now good place to work in. So there are very many issues we could discuss, but I start with the kind of meta-theoretical question, because you many times referred, and that was also the very idea of this theory, that the attempt to combine several layers of activities and several units of analysis. And then in a way it's something which I believe that many researchers believe when this is argued, but on the same time there are also, of course, many challenges. The first challenge is that if we look in from realistic point of view, what one researcher or in one research can be done, probably not to deal with simultaneously about the professional practices and brain activation. But we have to select always a kind of view and at least a starting point from the analysis, and look what could be the most kind of unit of analysis to start with when we start to analyze something. And if you now think, for example, these very different fields where visual expertise is should be studied. It has been studied and should be studied also in future, because I believe that it's so fundamental part of high-level expertise. Do you think that when we study, for example, medical doctors learning to deal with new imaging technologies and teachers, let's take mathematics teachers in the classroom, how they learn to notice relevant processes going on in their students, do you think that we can start with the same units of analysis, or are they so different fields that there are different preferences, that different views to these processes would be needed?
Thank you very much for the question. A very good question to start with, which I think indicates or highlights the affordances of different domains and visual fields as well. For example, in many studies in the medical field on medical expertise in radiology use as a stimulus two-dimensional representations of the human body, static pictures, X-ray scans, and then we compare what teachers have to deal with in their environments, in their domain of expertise. Then classrooms are typically not static. They're typically not two-dimensional, which would involve the handling, the competent management of simultaneous, transient information of a multitude of aspects. So I think that the affordances of the domain, of course, will have an impact or an influence on which units of analysis we choose to study in greater detail. Still, and that's the assumption also of the theory, it's a domain general theory, and ideally it would be applied to a multitude of different professions and different stimuli. And the hope is that it can inspire not a generalized, but a study of processes that are then somewhat comparable across professions, helping us to identify processes that experts do across domains and across visual fields. Now, interestingly, what you indicated in medicine, that we sometimes have new technologies entering the workplaces. And we have studied that in our Learn with Image projects earlier in Turku. For example, in pathology, when we now have digital microscopes to use, or when we have the tomosynthesis, a new representation of anatomy, then it's a question how experts deal with those new technologies and the new visual environments they're faced with. And also in terms of teaching, in COVID, teachers had to leave that three-dimensional space in classrooms, and they had to teach digitally in homeschooling environments, which also had an impact on their professional vision, of course, because they have had to deal with a reduced, narrow picture from their students on Zoom or Microsoft or other environments, which also had, I think, an impact on how they monitored and notice information in the classrooms.
Yes, this is very interesting example. I think that when teacher moved from face-to-face classroom to distant teaching using this kind of tools as Zoom and others, how it changed also the kind of visual expertise of teachers. But coming back this original question a little bit with an example of one study you did, where I was also a little bit participating, where the idea was to replicate one finding which is very strong in looking, for example, in radiology, that high-level experts are very fast in finding relevant features. For example, if there are serious indicators of diseases in the X-ray, they noticed a very big part of them they noticed very big part of these indicators in a few hundred milliseconds. But then when this was not possible to replicate in a classroom situation, and that's probably explained the difference, that if there is this stable two-dimensional picture, or then the dynamic classroom situation, also the visual challenge is different, because maybe it's a snapshot of classroom situation, not what is meaningful, but the X-ray is meaningful, and that's makes the difference.
A very good observation. When I reflect on the field of teacher professional vision, for example, we also have two approaches. We can, of course, study professional vision of experts in real, authentic classroom scenarios, or we can observe how experts or novices would watch classroom videos, which is very different. And I noticed that we have new colleagues from Germany coming in. Bernadette, Leonie, Özün, Anne-Sophie, welcome to the presentation. Due to time zone differences, it started at 13 o'clock German time, but we can still discuss, I think, together. It's now 15 o'clock Finnish time, about teacher professional vision. And many of you also have studied professional vision of teachers using videos or using authentic classroom situations. And what you said, Erno, I think is very true, that the decisions about the stimulus we use and the representations of classroom settings has a tremendous impact on how we study the different processes, definitely. Which is something that also Özün, PhD student of mine in Augsburg, is doing in a review, where she contrasts mobile eye tracking and fixed eye tracking, static eye tracking in a lab setting, which influences expertise differences heavily.
Yes, I think that there are many things which or differences which are interesting also from theoretical point of view, and as you mentioned, this mobile eye tracking in within the classroom when the teacher has these mobile eye tracking classes, or when a teacher is looking teaching of somebody else. Experimental control, where there is a video about classroom situations. There are many things which are different. Of course, this in general, typically teachers who are working in a classroom have much more knowledge about the students than those who participate in this controlled experiment, looking a kind of standard video of classroom situations, and all this background information, according to the theory you just has a huge impact also on the visual processes in this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so far, I think that this has not been discussed enough when we evaluate different methods used in. But maybe now, based on the theory, that could be one kind of field to bring forward the discussion.
Yeah, I fully agree. When we take serious what Goodwin said about professional vision, then it is not just a purely mental process, but has to do also with interaction with other people. And in classrooms, this would involve, of course, students, teachers deal with every day. And teachers, of course, acquire knowledge about their students and get familiar with them, know their routines, their habits, which they can use to interpret certain classroom behavior in their professional vision processes. And that's something I think critical to include in studies on teacher professional vision, that knowledge about students and how they typically behave when we try to portray expertise processes of teachers, which is completely or drastically different to, say, experts in medicine diagnosing X-rays, because those X-rays tend to have, you know, a limited amount of familiarity, or radiologists, for them they're more abstract. Rather, students have that familiarity that teachers can then use. And in classrooms, of course, it's not just only visual, but it's also about listening, choosing noises in a classroom. And we all know that, I think, from our own teaching at universities, for example, we get accustomed to, we are used to different noises. We can interpret signals acoustically and react to or not to react to, evaluate those noises, which is also different, I think, from medicine.
Yes, I think one interesting difference in different settings is also that if it's if the person is actually acting in that situation, or just looking it a little bit from outside. Of course, the radiologists have to write the report later on, but still, immediate situation is not acting, not interacting with that presence. But that's different, for example, in surgery, where the visual expertise there is deeply embedded in this ongoing activity, and in these natural classroom situations, when teachers are observing the classroom and acting immediately, so that then this visual perception is related to the immediate activities what they have to do, and this difference when people are looking it from outside or have to act based on that visual information immediately is I think something which should be studied more in future.
Agree, yeah. And when we compare, for example, a theory now to other theoretical frameworks, for example, in the field of teacher professional vision, then the process of noticing has often been defined as an attention-based processing, which I think is undeniable. But in terms of expertise, it is not just attention-driven, but a knowledge-based process. And I think that's an important part, an important message to convey now, that, as you just pointed out, also in terms of medical experts, what they see is largely contingent on their knowledge, what they know, how they experience the field over many years of deliberately working in the domain. And that's something not modeled yet in theoretical frameworks. Often noticing is modeled as attention-driven. But in our model, I think we make it very clear that there is a connection, a top-down connection from knowledge to the visual information.
Yes. There's also the social aspect, what I think is interesting part of the visual expertise. Of course, the Goodwin's theory is very strongly embedded in this professional community and the practices there. But then there are also other aspects, for example, the shared attention. For example, when people are working together, how they gradually learn to focus their attention to on the same time to the relevant aspects of the situation. So that's of course very important when we look classroom situations when teachers are guiding students, and then if they can reach the shared attention on the right time, because sometimes what the teacher is saying is cannot be understood if the students are not looking on the right place on the right time.
Precisely, yeah. So here we have again those gesturing practices
Yes,
highlighting information in a book or on a sheet of paper. That's true. And what we see also from the work of Maiti, that they did in Turku, and also from Helsinki, from the group of Mark Bartler, that expert teachers tend to engage in a shared attention by focusing on faces, on bodies of the students, and also on the instructional material a lot, to help students see in line with what they say, to make them understand, for example, mathematical content, fractions, and much more. I think that's an important aspect, is shared attention mechanisms, which has been already studied a long time ago from Goodwin and his work, and is now echoed also and then brought into the field of educational classrooms for the first time recently. Yeah. Which is, if you allow me, also interesting in terms of the professional development of teachers and the professionalism that pre-service teachers acquire in teacher education and once they leave in their teacher training in schools, is how they deal with heterogeneity and the pluralism of students in the classroom. Ideally, they should, of course, be treating students equally, regardless of gender, of race, skin color, much more, migrant backgrounds. But we see that this is not often the case. We see the certain stereotypes of teachers, which also have an impact on their professional vision, on their attempts toward shared attention, which needs to be studied more. I think it hasn't been studied in detail yet. We are starting a new project in Augsburg where we try to assess the attitudes of teachers toward heterogeneous aspects of students and how they influence professional vision of teachers.
Yes, sure. Okay, but coming back to this very general theoretical ideas behind this model, this attempt to integrate theories from different levels, and then it is important to remember, and that's something Stroger always remembers to say, that these theories also have different ontological and epistemological bases, and it is important that that when we combine these theories, we are aware of these differences, and so that it's not naive, eclectic combining to kind of conscious combining of theories, which we know that are kind of historically based on very different epistemological ideas, and that's also important in doing that. But still, I believe that if we try to deeply understand phenomena, it's important to make use of all this richness of the traditions, and to make use of all of them.
Yeah. Well, of course, the theory is now called the theory is now called a cognitive theory, which would indicate, of course, the almost post-positivist tradition, the cognitivist tradition, which many of the processes have been framed. And I'm very happy that you, Roger, have also been present and helping in develop the theory, because it is, I think, important to consider other epistemologies and accesses, perspectives on seeing beyond traditional cognitive research, integrating evidence we have from social material studies, from situated cognition, and many more, which honestly I struggled a bit in including that into our framework. And we have now, of course, the visual practices and usability practices as one of the model processes. We also have the assumption that experts interact with the environment, which is all related to a social cultural perspective, but I'm not sure if we give enough credit to the social cultural tradition, it's handled a bit roughly, I think.
Yes, but that's of course a good situation because there's something to elaborate further.
As always, thank you, Erno. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us. Thank you, Minna, for organizing. And thank you all for participating and thinking about these things with us together. And hope to see you next time.